Chapter 731. Compared to 3 years ago, they were all grown up. Shishi was already over 180 centimeters tall, and Yue Hengyu's height had even surpassed 185 centimeters. Both of them were very handsome, but Shishi almost constantly wore a sly smile on his face while Yue Hengyu gave off a pure and holy disposition. Their styles differed greatly, but both of them received a lot of attention from inner court disciples of the same age. The extra attention was simply unavoidable, considering they were part of Shrek's 7 monsters. What are you doing in here? Yue Hengyu pinched his nose as he looked around at the messy room. He then strode over and opened the window, allowing the balmy fresh air from the sea god's lake to blow into the room. Shishi sat down on his couch again with a dejected expression on his face. What the hell's wrong with you? Yue Hengyu glanced at him in an exasperated manner. The two of them were constantly bickering back and forth, but they were actually very good friends. Both of them had similar personalities in that they were quite unpredictable, but this trait was more pronounced in Shishi's case. A wry smile appeared on Shishi's face. Do you need something? If not, then get out of here. I don't have time for your nonsense. Oh. Yue Hengyu raised an eyebrow as he challenged, getting a little cocky. Are we? What's been going on with you? Do you want a sparring match so I can slap some sense into you? Shishi slumped onto the couch, not interested. A thought occurred to Yue Hengyu, and he made his way over to Shishi as he chuckled. I know what's going on. This is about Yuanan, right? Look at how pathetic you are. You've been pursuing Yuanan for so long, yet you still haven't succeeded. I don't even know what to say to you anymore. Get out. Shishi roared. Yue Hengyu stuck his hands into his pockets. TCH, I know exactly what's going on in that little head of yours. We've all come of age this year, and Sea God's Lake matchmaking convention is about to be held soon. The convention can be attended by all inner court disciples that are above 18 years of age. So you're worried that someone will take Yuanan away, right? Or are you worried that you won't have a chance with her? Shishi harumphed in response. I'm so handsome. How could I not have a chance with her? Even if she were going to choose someone, it could only be me. If she doesn't choose me, then no one else has a chance. Either. Yue Hengyu chuckled. I'm not sure that's true. There are many seniors in the inner court with exceptional looks and powers, and there's no lack of two-word battle armor masters among them. Either. How are you so sure that Yuanan will choose you? I think it's far from set in stone. Shishi aimed a vicious glare at him. I'll fight anyone who dares to try and take her from me, even if it means I die. Yue Hengyu scoffed. Look at your pathetic self. You're going to fight anyone who tries to take her. If I were Yuanan, I'd ignore you as well. You deserve this. Shishi immediately sprang to his feet like an enraged rooster upon hearing this. I'm never talking to you again. Yue Hengyu chuckled coldly. Be my guest. Do you know the most important element of pursuing a woman? Shishi replied. Having thick skin just like you. Piss off. You can sit around and mope. I'm not going to teach you anything. Yue Hengyu said as he turned around to leave. Shishi hurriedly lunged toward him before grabbing onto his arm. All right, you win. I'm sorry. Please teach me. Yue Hengyu turned around and chuckled. It's confidence. You idiot. If you don't even believe in yourself, why would Yuanan believe in you? You do indeed need to have thick skin, but you have to be confident as well. You've been nagging Yuanan for a long time already, right? But think about this. How many times have you truly confessed to her? Isn't this convention the perfect opportunity for you? Even if you fail, you have to tell everyone in the inner court what you just said to me. If anyone tries to steal Yuanan from you, you'll fight them with your life on the line. Show everyone your determination. Even if Yuanan rejects, at the very least, you'll have far fewer contenders to deal with. Also, let me tell you the truth. Yuanan is quite beautiful, but she possesses a titan giant ape martial soul and swings a pair of massive hammers around all the time. So not many people will actually want to take her from you. Yue Hengyu's words instantly struck Shishi with a sense of enlightenment. You're right. Why didn't I think of that? I kept worrying about whether she was going to reject me. But so what even if she does? I just have to display my resolve and get everyone to back off. That's solid advice. I owe you one, brother. I'm going to devise a plan, and after the matchmaking convention, I'm going to treat you to a big meal. Shishi was instantly reinvigorated. He had always had a great combative spirit and was never the type to admit defeat easily. It was just that he had forced himself into a corner, and his pain stemmed from the notion that he would be rejected by Yuanan no matter what. The Sea God Fate matchmaking convention was an event that only inner court Shrek Academy disciples could attend, and all attendees also had to be over 18 years old. This was a tradition that had existed since over 10,000 years ago. The students of Shrek Academy were simply far too outstanding, so it was quite difficult for them to find a suitable partner for themselves in the outside world. As such, many people chose to attend the matchmaking convention to find their other half. The most renowned match to have been made during the convention's history consisted of the spirit ice Douluo Huo Yuao and the dragon butterfly Douluo Tang Wutong. Their story was like a real-life fairy tale, so the period leading up to the matchmaking convention was always the most exciting time for the disciples of the inner court. All outer court students that had reached 18 years of age could spectate the event, and that was meant to act as motivation for them, urging them to work hard in their cultivation so they could become one-word battle armor masters as quickly as possible. After that, they'd have a chance to attend the convention as well. There was only around half a month left until the convention, and that was why Shishi had been so concerned. All of a sudden, a massive figure squeezed his way into Shishi's room, panting heavily as he did so. Shu Lizzie was a lot taller than he'd been 3 years ago, but his body weight had also increased proportionally. He had become a huge fatso, and he bore a rather similar appearance to the recovery pork buns that he made. What's going on? Shishi and Yue Hengyu both turned toward him with surprise in their eyes. Shishi and Yue Hengyu's personalities were rather similar, whereas Shu Lizzie's personality was quite close to that of Tang Wulin. He appeared to be quite bashful and simple-minded, but he was actually quite sinister on the inside, and those who got on his bad side usually ended up sorely regretting it. However, in stark contrast with his normal calm and steady demeanor, he seemed to be quite panicked at the moment. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Yue Hengyu asked. Shishi also chimed in. Yeah, what's going on? By the way, if you don't lose some weight, will you be able to attend the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention? Shu Lizzie glowered at him in an indignant manner. Why wouldn't I be able to participate in the convention? I've got a bunch of tricks up my sleeve. Now's not the time to be talking about this. Daiyuna and Long Yue just arrived at our academy. Who? Shishi exclaimed in a puzzled manner. Yue Hengyu was also rather perplexed. Those two names sound really familiar for some reason. Shu Lizzie reminded. They're two of the people on the Monster Academy team that we battled during the Continental Young Elites tournaments. Daiyuna is also a princess of the Star Dou Empire. Have you both forgotten about all this? That Long is that monster with the Mountain Dragon King martial soul. Yue Hengyu and Shishi's expressions both changed drastically upon hearing this, and they asked in unison, why did they come here? Shu's Healy replied. From the information I've gathered, they're apparently here as exchange students, and they'll be studying in our inner court, so we'll be studying at the same place as them from now on. What? Peculiar expressions appeared on both Yue Hengyu and Shishi's faces. They hadn't paid much attention to Daiyuna, but Dragon King Long Yue had left them with an extremely strong impression. On a one-on-one basis, none of Shrek's 7 monsters were a match for him, and Tang Wulin had even almost been killed by him in battle. Yue Hengyu had also been defeated by Long Yue once, so he was rather unsettled upon hearing this name. Shishi and Yue Hengyu glanced at one another before the latter asked, what's he doing here? Does he want to flaunt his superiority over us? Even though all of the current Shrek 7 monsters had grown very quickly in the past 3 years, there was still a clear gap between them and Long Yue. He was already a 6-ring soul emperor over 3 years ago, after all. On top of that, he was also a 2-word battle armor master. Even if he hadn't become a 3-word battle armor master during these past 3 years, he would have most definitely become more powerful than he had been, and there was no way that any of Shrek's 7 monsters could match him. Shu Lizzie shrugged in a nonchalant manner. Who knows? Maybe he's here to seek revenge. In any case, I'm just a food-type soul master, so this has nothing to do with me, and I have sisters England to protect me. You two should pray for your own safety. Oh, can you have any less backbone? Yue Hengyu scoffed as he rolled his eyes. Backbone? What's the use in having something like that? It's not like I can eat it. All right, I'm going now. I still have to prepare for the matchmaking convention. Shu Lizzie chuckled. Yue Hengyu's eyes immediately lit up. Who do you have your eyes set on? Fatty? You're not into Wisujuo or Zhang Yuren, are you? One of them has thorns while the other is toxic, so you better be careful. Chapter 732. Shu Lizzie rolled his eyes in response. I've got my eyes set on both Yuan and Yue and Shu Xiaoan, and I'm currently thinking about which one I should confess to. Do you want to die? Yue Hengyu and Shishi both exclaimed in unison. Shu Lizzie burst into laughter at the sight of their menacing expressions. You two are looking more and more like a couple. After that, he squeezed out the door and sped away as quickly as he could. Shishi and Yue Hengyu glanced at one another before the latter abruptly sprang backward and warned, you better keep your distance from me. Piss off. This is my room. News of Dou and Long Yue's arrival quickly spread through the entire inner court, and they were also made aware of the fact that these two were going to be studying alongside them during the upcoming period of time. Others didn't know much about him, but this generation of Shrek's 7 monsters were very familiar with him. Long Yue was like an insurmountable figure in their hearts that had left an extremely profound impression on them. If it weren't for Tang Wulin's bloodline intimidation, Dou Yue's Earth Element Seal, and the final Divine Dragon transformation, they wouldn't have been able to defeat such a fearsome opponent. Following the competition, even Wu Zhangkong had admitted that he couldn't ensure victory against Long Yue in a one-on-one battle. Such glowing praise naturally only further accentuated just how powerful this freakish prodigy of the Douluo Empire was. What did you say? Xu Shaoen's scream was audible even from several hundred meters away. Not only her, but all of Shrek's 7 monsters were also staring at the two people before them with dumbstruck expressions on their faces. They had finally met Dou and Long Yue, who had come all the way here from afar, and the two of them revealed a piece of astonishing news to everyone. It's true, Dou had an earnest look in her eyes as she said, "Not long ago, we'd received news that Tang Wulin is returning to the Douluo continent from the Tang sect headquarters in Douluo City on a long-distance ferry supplied by the Tang sect. Traveling by sea is quite unpredictable, but the Tang sect's long-distance ferries have always been quite reliable." The two of us hurried over as we heard this news. Has he still not come back yet? All of the members of Shrek's 7 monsters, with the exception of Gu Yue, were completely shocked to hear this news. He's not dead. Captain's still alive? He survived even after the small world collapsed. She exclaimed as he suddenly leapt into the air with unbridled excitement. Yue's Hengyu also swung an arm through the air in an elated manner. Daiuna's eyes were shimmering with a peculiar light. I was also really shocked to hear this. I always thought that he'd already. Thank heavens he's still alive. I'm sure the information from the Tang sect is reliable, so we'll wait here for him. Yi Xinglin was one of the calmer people present, and she looked at Daiyuna as she asked, "Why do you want to meet Wulin?" Daiyuna smiled, and replied, "He's my man, so of course I have to come and find him after finding out he's still alive." What did you say? Everyone stared at Daiyuna with flabbergasted expressions, and they seemed even more shocked by this revelation than they were by the news that Tang Wulin was still alive. A faint blush appeared on Daiyuna's face as she explained in a shy manner. Over 3 years ago, we entered the small world together as we were both agents of the Tang sect's battle hall. He was White 3 while I was White 7, and we were placed into the same group by chance. After staying with each other for so long, a relationship naturally blossomed, and one thing led to another. After that, we encountered an extremely perilous situation, and he teleported me out of the small world first to protect me, but I lost contact with him immediately thereafter. I've been searching for him for all these years. I'm sure he'll be fine. Not long ago, I finally received some news about him, and he's my fiancé, so I naturally had to come and find him. All of you are his best friends, so if he comes back, make sure to tell him that I came. If he's willing to go back to the Douluo continent with me, then he'll be my fiancé. If he really doesn't want to come with me, then I'll stay here for him, even if it means that I won't be a royal anymore. Everyone's eyes widened even further at the sight of Daiyuna's shy display. All of them reflexively turned toward Gu Yue to gauge her reaction, but strangely enough, her expression remained completely calm and unchanged. "Thank you for bringing news about Wulin back to us, but he still hasn't returned yet. We've also all been waiting for him this entire time. If there's nothing else you'd like to speak about, then we'll be taking our leave now," Gu Yue said in an indifferent voice before immediately turning around to depart. A smug look appeared in Daiyuna's eyes, and she smiled as she said, "I'll be waiting for him here. I'm sure he'll return to the academy as soon as he comes back." None of the other members of Shrek's 7 monsters said anything in response, and they all departed behind Gu Yue. "Don't listen to her spout nonsense. Gu Yue, I can tell from the unsteady tone of her voice that she's lying. On top of that, Captain was only 15 years old 3 years ago. How could something have happened between them just because they were together for a few months?" Yi Xinglin consoled in a level-headed manner. She said, "But they've already come to our academy. If nothing happened between them, why is she in such a hurry to see him? In any case, it's fantastic news that Captain is still alive. We'll let him take care of these matters on his own when he gets back." Everyone nodded in response. These types of matters could only be addressed by the people directly involved. What he did has nothing to do with me. Gu Yue suddenly sped up and quickly detached herself from the rest of the group. "Why did you have to come back at a time like this? I had just made up my mind to leave a few months from now. So why did you have to come back now? It took me so much effort to finally rid myself of these chaotic emotions, but news of your return has completely undone all of these efforts. Why are you coming back? Why now of all times? What do we do?" Everyone glanced at one another. "We'll just have to wait until Captain comes back. These are his personal matters, so we can't really do anything," Yue's Hengyu said with a resigned shrug. Indeed, this wasn't something that they could interfere with. In any case, all of them were in extremely high spirits. Tang Wulin was alive and well, and he was about to come back. Could there be any better news than this? Several days later, at the main gate of Shrek Academy, after getting off the Soul Taxi, Tang Wulin was greeted by the sight of the massive familiar gate, and he felt as if the past 3 years were memories from a past life. Only after leaving the Dragon Valley was he made aware of just how long he'd stayed in there. It was a total of 3 years and 4 months. During those 40 long months, he'd completed the monumental feat of burying all of the dragon skeletons in the Dragon Tomb. He was now 18 years old and close to turning 19. Everyone must be all grown up now. I wonder if the academy has changed much during the time I've been away. My friends, I'm back. Are you all still at the academy? I'm back. Naya, sorry for making you worry. With these complex emotions in his heart, Tang Wulin quickly rushed over to the gate of Shrek City before planting an enthusiastic kiss onto the wall. The feeling of returning home filled his entire body with a scorching giddy energy. After making his way into Shrek City, he looked around to discover that everything was extremely familiar. He rushed over to the familiar noodle shop that Shu Lizzie had once taken him to, and he ordered 10 bowls of noodles to feast on at once. Back when he'd used his Dragon Ball to depart from the Dragon Valley, he discovered that there wasn't even a single person to be seen on the mountain summit. As such, he had no choice but to traverse through the forest, and it took him a long time to find a car before returning to Douluo City. After arriving back at the city, he could only request assistance from the Tang sect. Thankfully, the Tang sect owned cargo ferries that shipped products between the two continents, and he'd received news from the Tang sect that the delegation had already returned to the Douluo continent over 2 years ago. Chapter 733. Thus, Tang Wulin spent some contribution points to get onto the cargo ferry that was traveling toward the Douluo continent. Along the way, the ferry was attacked by sea soul beasts a few times, so there were a few slight delays, but he was finally back now. This was the feeling of returning home, and it was a fantastic feeling. Never did Tang Wulin think that he'd fall so heavily in love with Shrek Academy. After downing 10 bowls of noodles, he managed to repress his excitement somewhat. With everyone's powers and aptitudes, they should all be in the inner court already. More than 3 years have passed, so they've most likely all become one-word battle armor masters. But I'm still. Tang Wulin couldn't help but feel rather dejected as this thought occurred to him. During the 3 years he'd spent in the Dragon Valley, his blood essence had improved drastically, and his body had also become incredibly powerful. However, his soul power had been sealed for over 3 years, and it hadn't advanced in the slightest. As such, he was still just a 4-ring soul ancestor. Perhaps it was simply due to the passage of time, but he'd progressed slightly to rank 44. A 15-year-old rank 44 soul ancestor was already considerably powerful, but he was about to turn 19 soon. A 19-year-old rank 44 soul ancestor was exceptional among normal people, but it was rather lackluster in Shrek Academy. One had to realize that if a student of Shrek Academy hadn't become a one-word battle armor master by the time they turned 20, then they'd lose the right to enter the inner court. As such, he really had to hurry up and catch up to his friends following his return. After enjoying a hearty meal and paying the bill, Tang Wulin headed directly toward the inner court of Shrek Academy as he was sure that was where his friends would be. More importantly, he hadn't seen his little sister for over 3 years, so he had to pay her a visit. After all, Naya had to be worried sick. After arriving at the entrance of Shrek Academy's inner court, Tang Wulin was barred from entry by the 2 guards there, both of whom were inner court disciples. Without an inner court identification badge, no one could enter the inner court. Thus, Tang Wulin pulled out the soul communicator that he hadn't used for over 3 years. He then used his soul power to charge the communicator before dialing that familiar number. The ringtone sounded for a while before the call was connected. He was greeted by the sound of complete silence. "Naya?" Tang Wulin said in an uncertain voice. "ARGH." Immediately thereafter, a sharp screech rang out from the other side, and he felt as if his eardrums were about to explode. He was given a massive fright as a result, and he almost hurled the soul communicator away. Even the 2 guards standing beside the entrance had heard the scream from where they were standing. "Big brother, is that you? Is that you?" Naya asked in an excited and urgent manner, and he was almost brought to tears by the sound of his familiar voice. "It's me, Naya. I'm back. Where are you?" He asked. "I'm on the Sea God's Island. Where are you, big brother?" Naya's breathing was becoming a lot more hurried. Tang Wulin replied, "I'm outside the gate of the inner court. There are guards here who won't let me in. Wait for me." Naya said, and Tang Wuling could immediately hear the sound of howling winds from the other side of the line. Don't hang up, big brother. I'll be there right away. All right, I'll wait for you. Tang Wuling's eyes were already filled with excitement at this point. After only around 15 seconds, Tang Wuling caught sight of a streak of silver light hurtling toward him from the inner court like a bolt of lightning. Before he had a chance to react, the silver light had already sped into his arms. A soft and slender body pressed itself against him, and he was greeted by a familiar fragrant scent, as well as the sight of a head of long silver hair. His heart trembled, and he didn't even need to ask to know who it was that was in his arms. Naya had grown taller, and her body had also grown more voluptuous. She had truly become a young woman. Tang Wuling was already over 190 centimeters tall, yet she was only slightly shorter than him. At this moment, she had already jumped onto Tang Wuling with her legs wrapped around his waist and her arms wound tightly around his neck. Tang Wuling was desperately tugging down her dress in case her sensitive regions were exposed. The two inner court disciples standing beside the gate were already completely dumbstruck. There was only one person in the academy who had silver hair, and she was renowned as the goddess of the sea gods island, the Dragon Spear Goddess, Naya. The nickname of Dragon Spear Goddess had been around since the past 3 years. Naya very rarely appeared before the public eye, but during a large contest between inner court disciples, she had crushed everyone with her extraordinary silver dragon spear, thereby becoming the most powerful being among all inner court disciples. It could be said that she was the goddess of the entire inner court, particularly in the eyes of all of the male disciples. However, she was always on the sea gods island, and normal inner court disciples weren't allowed access to that place, so it was very difficult just to see her. If anyone could exchange a verbal greeting with her, they definitely faint from bliss. However, at this moment, the perfect goddess in their hearts had her body pressed against a man in a rather uncouth pose. It was quite apparent that she was extremely excited. Tang Wuling gently stroked Naya's long hair with one hand while inconspicuously separating her body from his slightly. The current Naya was no longer the Naya of old. She had grown up, and the fact that some of her well-developed lady bits were pressed up against Tang Wuling was making him feel rather awkward as her big brother. Don't cry, Naya. Big brother's back now. It's all my fault for making you worry. Big brother. The two inner court disciples guarding the entrance were immediately struck by a sense of profound respect for Tang Wuling upon hearing this. This was the big brother of the Dragon Spear Goddess. Why didn't he tell them this from the get-go? Even if it were against the rules, they would have still let him in. Tang Wuling gently patted Naya's long legs, and only then did she clamber down from his body. In the next instant, she raised her head and planted a pair of kisses on Tang Wuling's cheeks right before the astonished eyes of two guards before she finally unwound her arms from his neck. Inspecting Naya at such close quarters, Tang Wuling couldn't help but feel his heart rate spiking dramatically. She was simply far too beautiful. Her long silver hair draped down her back, and her purple eyes were like a pair of glistening amethysts. She was tall and slender with a thin waist and long legs, and she had developed extremely well in the right places. Her large eyes were currently shimmering with tears, and the expression on her face was like that of a pitiable abandoned puppy. In Naya's eyes, Tang Wuling had also changed. Compared to over 3 years ago, he had grown taller and broader. Back then, he used to be more pretty like a woman, but he had now well and truly transitioned to being handsome with a strong masculine aura emanating from his body. Big brother, you were gone for more than 3 years without contacting me even once. I missed you so much. Naya dove into his arms again and burst into loud sobs. Tang Wuling hurriedly held onto her and consoled. Don't cry, I'm back now, aren't I? I'm not going anywhere, okay? Yes, never go anywhere ever again. Naya suddenly looked up at him with her teary eyes and asked, Big brother, do you love me? I do. Of course I do. You're my most precious Naya. Tang Wuling smiled as he gently pinched her nose. Naya also smiled upon hearing this. You have to remember what you just said. Can I go in now? Everyone else is also here in the inner court, right? Tang Wuling asked. Naya nodded and replied, they've all entered the inner court, and they're super popular now because they're the new generation of Shrek's 7 monsters. You didn't become a member of Shrek's 7 monsters? Tang Wuling was rather surprised to hear this. He recalled that back when he left, Naya had already been very powerful. Naya shook her head in response. I didn't want to become a member. Come with me, big brother. Let's go in first, and I'll tell you about everything along the way. After that, she dragged Tang Wuling over to the gate before giving the two guards a mesmerizing smile. Both of the guards were momentarily entranced, and Naya led Tang Wuling into the inner court just like that. Don't I need something that'll grant me access? Tang Wuling asked in a dumbstruck manner. Naya giggled. I'm your personal access badge. The inner court was still exactly the same as Tang Wuling had remembered it to be. At the conclusion of the path was a series of familiar statues, and these statues were frequently repaired, so they still looked brand new. Naya dragged Tang Wuling all the way over to the edge of the Sea God's Lake. Let's go to the Sea God's Island first. Big brother, I have something I want to tell you. Naya stepped forward as she spoke, and a layer of silver light suddenly radiated from her body. Specks of silver light shimmered over her joints, and they were like dazzling silver stars. In the next instant, pieces of armor began to appear all over her body. Tang Wuling appraised the complex patterns on the suit of silver battle armor, then glanced at the pair of silver dragon wings that had unfurled themselves, and he couldn't help but exclaim, two-word battle armor. On top of that, it wasn't just one or two pieces of two-word battle armor. She had a complete set. Chapter 734. After over 3 years apart, Naya was already a two-word battle armor master, while he wasn't even a one-word battle armor master. Naya smiled as she held onto Tang Wuling's hand before flapping her wings, and she rose up into the air with him. A ball of gentle soul power enveloped both of their bodies, and Tang Wuling could sense that Naya's soul power was extremely dense, far more than his soul power was. After just a few flashes, they'd already arrived in the air above the Sea God's Island. The silver dragon wings folded themselves away again, and the two of them descended as the suit of battle armor fused back into Naya's body as specks of light. Naya, you're already a two-word battle armor master. Come to think of it, you're only 16 years old at the moment. My god. You must be the youngest two-word battle armor master in the history of the entire continent. Tang Wuling stared at Naya with an astonished look on his face. He and his companions already possessed great aptitude, and all of them worked extremely hard, but he could say with certainty that there was definitely no way that they could have become two-word battle armor masters in such a short time. Naya aptitude simply defied the natural order. Even that Long Yue was almost 20 years old when he became a two-word battle armor master. Judging from the soul power fluctuations emanating from her body, even if she weren't a six-ring battle emperor yet, her powers were already on par with those of that level. Has his own little sister already become this powerful? Such a revelation wasn't enough to strike him with self-pity, but he was well and truly shocked. Naya chuckled. That's not important. What's important is that you're back. She dragged him deeper into the Sea God's Island as she spoke. Naya was extremely familiar with this place, and she quickly led Tang Wuling to a small wooden cabin that had been constructed halfway up a mountain. The cabin wasn't very large, and it only had 2 rooms, but it was very clean, and the air here was very refreshing. The air on the Sea God's Island was the freshest among all of the places that Tang Wuling had been to. Even the air in a lush forest couldn't compare. Inside the wooden cabin were a table, a chair, a bench, a wardrobe, and a hammock. There was a layer of dark green leaves from an indeterminate tree draped over the hammock. Do you normally live here, Naya? Tang Wuling asked. Naya nodded in response. I do. I live here, and I really like it here. She laid her hands onto Tang Wuling's shoulders and sat him down on the bench, then poured a glass of water for him. As she thrust the glass of water into his hand, tears began to well up in her eyes again. Big brother, do you know how much I've missed you these past 3 years? Did you miss me? Why did you come back so late? Tang Wuling's heart throbbed with pain at the sight of Naya's tearful display, and he sighed. I should have come back a long time ago, but there was something that I had to do, and it took me 3 years to do it, which is why I came back so late. Whenever I was sleepy or tired, I would think of you and everyone else, and that would grant me the strength and motivation to continue. Even though I spent 3 years of my life doing just that one thing, I don't regret it at all. There are times when a man must do something, and after doing that thing, I felt like a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. During the several months it took me to return to the Douluo continent, my soul power went up 2 ranks. That rate of progress would have been unimaginable to me in the past. Indeed, during his few months at sea, his soul power had progressed from rank 44 to rank 46. More importantly, he had also opened 2 more of his 8 extraordinary meridians, and the other 4 of the 8 extraordinary meridians had also become countless times more resolute than they'd been in the past. As such, Tang Wuling was very confident that he'd be able to make rapid progress in his cultivation. You must have suffered a lot, right, big brother? Naya latched onto his hand. Tang Wuling smiled and replied, "It was all right. It was just that I was the only one in that place, so I was a little lonely at times." He didn't fear hardships and adversity as those were both things he'd become accustomed to from a young age. As such, the most difficult thing for him to deal with during the past 3 years was loneliness. If it weren't for the fact that he could communicate with the dragon skeletons, he wasn't sure whether he would have been able to retain his sanity throughout the burial process. However, he continued to persevere in the end, and he was in a better mental place than he'd ever been before. Everything within his body told him that he'd done the right thing, and that the past 3 years of his life had been very well spent. What about you, Naya? I can see you're already a 2-word battle armor master. Have you become a 6-ring soul emperor yet? Even though he was already mentally prepared for her response, he still couldn't help but feel shocked at the sight of her gentle nod. She was a 16-year-old soul emperor. Surely there was no one in history who could match her. On top of that, she had the forge battle armor as well, and that required a vast amount of time and effort. Naya could no longer even be described as just a freakish prodigy. Tang Wuling gave her a thumbs up and asked, "And what about my friends? How have they been?" Naya replied, "From what I've heard, they've always been in very low spirits ever since you disappeared. However, after becoming Shrek 7 monsters, they've become role models for the entire academy, so they've been working very hard in their cultivation. I think all of them had attained 5 rings a year ago, and they'd all become 1-word battle armor masters even earlier than that. As for their current cultivation ranks, I'm not particularly sure. Everyone has become 5-ring soul kings and 1-word battle armor masters already. My disappearance must have hampered them in forging their 2-word battle armor. After all, forging spirit alloy 2-word battle armor is very difficult." Tang Wuling patted Naya's head and said, "Naya, I still haven't reported my return to the academy yet. I'll go find the teachers and inform them of my return first. Let's keep chatting after that." Naya hurriedly said, "Don't go reporting to the teachers. Even though you disappeared for 3 years, the academy has already granted you special permission to enter the inner court for the contributions that you've made, which means you're also an inner court disciple now. If there's anyone you should inform, it should be the Scarlet Dragon Douluo, Grandpa Chawoshi. Oh, I almost forgot. There's going to be a massive event taking place in the academy today, so all of your friends are most likely busy preparing for that. If you go and meet them now, you'll definitely affect their preparations. So why don't you reveal yourself to them during the event and give them a surprise?" Tang Wuling faltered upon hearing this. What event is this? A mysterious smile appeared on Naya's face, and she replied, "The Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention." The Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention? Is that the matchmaking convention held by the inner court? Tang Wuling had naturally heard of the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention, but he wasn't quite sure about what exactly it entailed. Only after Naya had mentioned it did he realize that he had already reached an age where he could participate in this event. A series of complex emotions surged through his heart as he made this realization. Time sure flew by in a flash. Before he knew it, he'd already come of age. Naya leaned down beside his ear and whispered something to him, following which his expression changed slightly, and a faint smile appeared on his face. "So you're saying all single inner court disciples over 18 years of age must participate in the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention?" Naya giggled. "That's right. According to the official laws of the continent, one actually comes of age after turning 16, so I've technically come of age as well, and the teachers have given me special permission to participate in this matchmaking convention. It's said that this convention can promote competition between students and provide everyone with motivation for their future cultivation." This was indeed true. Tang Wuling was unaware of Naya's title of Dragon Spear Goddess in the inner court, but if an announcement were to be made that she was participating in this matchmaking convention, even the inner court disciples who were out on missions would most likely all rush back to participate in the event. Chapter 735. All of the inner court disciples were brilliant prodigies, so who was to say that the Dragon Spear Goddess wouldn't fall for one of them? Naya's looks, power, and her status as the direct disciple of the Master of the Sea Gods Pavilion placed her at the very pinnacle of all students in the academy. On top of that, she was the #1 goddess in the hearts of all of the male students. "You're going to participate as well? No way. I won't allow it," Tang Wuling said in a serious manner. Naya turned to him with a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Why?" Tang Wuling continued in a serious voice, "You're still so young. How could you go around participating in matchmaking events like this? As your big brother, I refuse to let you go to this event." Naya couldn't help but burst into laughter upon hearing this. "I didn't think you were so dogmatic, big brother." Tang Wuling replied, "I'm your big brother, so of course I have to be responsible for you. No relationships before you turn 18. Do you hear me? Also, even if someone catches your eye, you have to bring him to me first. My little sister is so beautiful and talented. I can't just hand her off to anyone." Naya giggled. "Don't worry, big brother. I already have someone I like, and I'm sure you'll be very pleased with him." Tang Wuling faltered upon hearing this. "There's someone you like already?" Naya nodded in response. "Of course. It's you." Tang Wuling shook his head with a resigned yet doting smile. "Stop making jokes at my expense, you little brat. If you really want to participate in the matchmaking convention, you can go, but don't just choose anyone on a whim." All right, I get it already. Don't worry, even if someone catches my fancy, I'll bring them to you for permission, okay?" Naya replied with an amused smile. "Good." Tang Wuling nodded in a pleased manner before continuing. "I have to go find Grand Teacher now. Which way do I go again? It's been so long since I've been here. I don't remember how to get anywhere anymore." Naya offered, "I can take you there, then I'll go visit Teacher. After that, I can come back to meet you. Oh, by the way, don't contact your friends using your soul communicator. Make sure the matchmaking convention is the first place that they see you." Tang Wuling smiled and nodded. "All right, I'll do as you say. The matchmaking convention, eh?" A familiar face appeared in Tang Wuling's mind, and his emotions immediately became a lot more complex. He was still a young man, so of course he had thought about finding his true love during the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention. But was this a convention really something that he could participate in? A peculiar look appeared on Tang Wuling's face as these thoughts flashed through his mind. Thus, he met his grand teacher for the first time in over 3 years with a series of complex emotions in his heart. Scarlet Dragon Douluo, she was sampling some tea in his yard, and when he caught sight of Tang Wuling, his hand trembled, yet he remained completely oblivious even as he spilled hot tea all over his hand. "Wuling! Grand Teacher." Tang Wuling hurriedly rushed forward a few steps before falling to one knee. The Scarlet Dragon Douluo rose to his feet at an alarming speed that was completely uncharacteristic of someone of his age before helping Tang Wuling up from the ground. "Where did you go all these years? I'm so glad you're safe. You can't just go around venturing into small worlds. I almost went with that crazy old man to flip the entire Tang sect on its head. Thank heavens you're back. That crazy old man really is about to go crazy. His mood has been so volatile these past few years that he's basically been impossible to interact with. I have to tell him this good news right away." Following a brief call via soul communicator, it took Blazing Dragon Douluo Feng Wuyu less than 3 minutes to arrive on the scene. As soon as he caught sight of Tang Wuling, a look of thunderous rage appeared on his face, and he gave Tang Wuling a vicious slap. Tang Wuling didn't dare to evade, and he was sent flying as a result. However, the slap appeared to be quite vicious, but it actually didn't really hurt. "What are you doing, you crazy old bastard? You better not do anything out of line here, or I'll kick you out." Chawoshi was furious. Feng Wuyu placed his hands on his hips as he roared. "Piss off. You don't know anything. Tang Wuling, you little bastard. You still remembered to come back? Let me ask you this. Have you fallen behind in your forging?" Tang Wuling didn't dare to say anything, and only after Feng Wuyu had finished did he hurriedly reply, "I haven't fallen too far behind. I should be at the pinnacle of 6th rank blacksmiths at the moment, and I was hoping to learn soul refinement from you after I got back. Come with me. I have to check your skills." He grabbed onto Tang Wuling as he spoke before rising up into the air. "Wait for me. I have to come along and keep an eye on you so you don't hurt my grand disciple." Chawoshi hurriedly followed along. Tang Wuling was feeling quite speechless. He hadn't even completed the forms required to enter the inner court. And what about the matchmaking convention later tonight? However, Tang Wuling was very familiar with Feng Wuyu, and he knew that forging was paramount in Feng Wuyu's heart. In comparison, nothing else mattered. Of course, nothing else mattered to Feng Wuyu, but that didn't mean nothing else mattered to him. He really wanted to participate in this matchmaking convention, especially if she was going to be there, regardless of whether he'd be able to succeed or not. He'd never know unless he tried. In Shrek Academy, the matchmaking convention was an event that all of the adult students were extremely looking forward to. Even the outer court disciples were always extremely excited in the lead up to this event, as they wanted to witness the powers of their inner court seniors in order to motivate themselves. Relationships between outer court disciples wouldn't receive approval from the academy, but in reality, the academy had nothing against suggest such relationships, either. However, for the students of Shrek Academy, it was a completely different feeling to forge a relationship during the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention. The event was known as the greatest trial of love on the entire Douluo continent as it verified two people's love for one another, as well as their respective powers. As such, there were no extra prizes or rewards for successful matches during the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention, but it was still extremely renowned across the entire continent. Countless people from all over the continent wished to spectate the event, but the rules of Shrek Academy prohibited all outsiders from spectating the convention. Only the participating inner court disciples, outer court disciples of suitable ages, and teachers of the academy could witness the event. This gave the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention an extra layer of mystery and intrigue. Furthermore, according to the rules of Shrek Academy, if two people were to accept one another during the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention, they would receive the blessing of the everlasting love vow of the Sea God's Pavilion. This blessing will be handed down by the master of the Sea God's Pavilion, and if the couple were to split up in the future, they had to go to the Sea God's Pavilion to state the reasons for this. The Sea God's Pavilion would then mediate for the two of them, and they could only break up if that proved to be unsuccessful. So it was essentially an additional layer of insurance on the relationship. To the outer court disciples of Shrek Academy, the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention had already become one of the main motivating factors for them to strive to make it into the inner court. This edition of the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention was particularly exciting for everyone as news had spread that the dragon spear goddess, Naya, was going to be participating. No one knew whether she was participating just for fun or if she were actually looking for love, but that was still extremely astonishing news to everyone. It had been over 10,000 years since the inception of the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention, and the rules had always been changing. However, the core concept remained constant. This was an event to test the abilities of the inner court disciples and to help them find their true love. If one were powerful enough, then there was no way that they'd find a successful match for themselves. In this respect, Shrek Academy was completely ruthless and unreasonable. You want to find true love, but you're not strong enough to fight off contenders? How about you cultivate harder before you attend the convention? This appeared to be a simple matchmaking event, but to the students of the inner court, it was extremely exciting and motivating. In particular, the students that had already chosen someone to confess their love to during the event had been cultivating extra hard in the lead up to the convention. According to past statistics gathered by Shrek Academy, the more powerful a disciple was, the greater the likelihood that they'd successfully find love during the convention. This was a fact that was set in stone. On top of that, there was a statistic that stated that there was a very high success rate for women confessing to men during the convention, hovering at around 60%. Conversely, the success rate was lower. However, a contributing factor to this was that during the vast majority of times, there were more male disciples in the inner court compared to their female counterparts. To put it frankly, there weren't enough women to go around most of the time. Yue's Hangyu and Shishi strode side by side out of the inner court school building, and they drew a lot of attention from passers-by. At this point, the outer court disciples still hadn't been permitted to enter the inner court, so it was still relatively peaceful in the inner court. Yue's Hangyu wore his usual white suit with golden feather patterns emblazoned onto its surface, giving off a refined and regal air. This was a traditional design worn by the Holy Angel faction, so it was very unique. In contrast, Shishi wore a black suit with silver dragon patterns on its surface. If Yue's Hangyu were a holy angel, then he would be a ghost traversing through a dark night. One of them wore black while the other wore white, and they were both extremely handsome, so how could they not receive widespread attention when walking alongside one another? Chapter 736. Oi, wait for me, you bastards. The portly Shu Lizzie rushed over from behind them. What do you want, fatty? You're going to ruin our image, Yue's Hangyu said in a disdainful manner. Shu Lizzie was still in his school uniform, but the uniform in the inner court was different from that of the outer court. It was orange in color, and was of excellent design and quality. However, with Shu Lizzie's porky frame, everything looked like an oversized rucksack on him anyway. Shu Lizzie wasn't irked by Yue's Hangyu's disdainful display. Instead, he chuckled as he squeezed between the two of them and walked along at the center. If we walk around like this, it looks like a rich landlord walking with his two bodyguards. Piss off. Shishi and Yue's Hangyu exclaimed in unison before glaring at one another as they continued in unison. Can you not be so in sync with me? Are you two going to confess to each other during the matchmaking convention? It's all right, I support you too. I'm going on ahead now. Shu Lizzie chuckled with amusement before speeding away like the wind. Despite the fact that his body weight had constantly been increasing, his speed had also been improving in equal measure. Yue's Hangyu and Shishi glanced at one another before harumphing in perfect synchronicity. Meanwhile, preparations on the surface of the Sea God's Lake had already commenced. Shishi was already fully prepared as he arrived at the edge of the lake, but he was still feeling quite nervous. Is this really going to work? What if Yuan gets mad at me? He asked in an uneasy manner. Yue's Hangyu turned to him with an exasperated look. Can you not be so cowardly? You know what? Why don't you just go back and sulk in your room? I've never seen anyone as pathetic as you. Is Yuan supposed to be some kind of ferocious beast? Who did you say was a ferocious beast? A flat voice sounded from behind them. Shishi and Yue's Hangyu hurriedly turned around, only to discover Yuan and Yui standing right behind them in her usual male attire. I didn't say that. It was the voice of Shishi's heart. Oh, would you look at the time? Gotta run. Yue's Hangyu instantly fled the scene. He was no match for Yuan and Yui in battle. Yuan. For some reason, all of the courage that Shishi had mustered up earlier vanished as soon as he caught sight of Yuan and Yui, and he rubbed his hands together in an anxious manner. Yuan and Yui nearly took a glance at him before departing with a cold look on her face without uttering even a single word. Shishi looked on at Yuan and Yui's departing figure, and he sagged like a deflated balloon. It appeared he still didn't have a chance. After all, there's no way that she's going to accept my confession. Otherwise, why would she still be in her male attire even though the convention is about to commence? What should I do? I am so dead. The commencement of the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention was imminent, and Shishi naturally wasn't the only one who was feeling very nervous. At this moment, there were countless students in the inner court experiencing accelerated heart rates. To the inner court disciples who had come of age, this day was simply far too important. Ever since they'd first entered Shrek Academy, they'd been constantly under pressure from the entire academy. None of the teachers in the academy stipulated that they had to do something or become something, but all of the students of Shrek Academy were exceptional prodigies. In the midst of so many freakish talents, there was always the feeling that one would be surpassed by their fellow students, even if they slacked off just a little. This was not a good feeling, but no one wanted to be expelled after expending so much effort to make it into Shrek Academy in the first place. As such, the only thing they could do after entering the academy was work as hard as they could without daring to grow even slightly complacent. Only after working extremely hard year after year could the most exceptionally talented students stand out from the rest. These students would become one-word battle armor masters before turning 20, thereby granting them a place in the inner court. Only the likes of the monster 8 kings of the Douluo continent's Monster Academy had the right to enter the inner court of Shrek Academy. As such, this was the only time where they could relax a little. At around 20 years of age was when hormonal secretion reached its peak, so of course they were yearning to meet their other half. However, only at a time like this did they truly have the opportunity and the power to choose their other half. The academy had prepared this opportunity for them in the form of this Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention. Not all students of Shrek Academy would choose their partners within the academy, but this applied to the vast majority of the inner court disciples. The reason for this was very simple. If two people were to be together, they had to at least have common topics that they could discuss. If two people were vastly different from one another, perhaps for a short time they may overlook these differences, but it would be very difficult to maintain a relationship. As it turned out, almost all of the matches that were made during the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention stayed together for life with the exception of those who encountered extraordinary circumstances. With the same experiences and the same goals, those couples would greatly cherish one another, and they could advance together toward a shared cultivation dream. Such a relationship wasn't just one that was forged on love, but also on the basis of dual cultivation. Through assisting and supporting one another, their relationships would prove to be more stalwart than most. As such, all of the inner court disciples were always extremely excited in the lead up to the Sea God Fate Matchmaking Convention. During the period of time prior to the commencement of the convention, not only would they be working hard in their cultivation, they would also be searching for love interests. There was also another type of situation where some already had love interests, and they wanted to express their love during the sea god fate matchmaking convention. During the process, they'd be proving themselves through their own powers, and also forging their bonds right in front of all of their fellow students. It could be said that the sea god fate matchmaking convention was not only a type of service offered to inner court disciples by the academy, but also a type of honor bestowed upon the couples of the inner court by the academy. It was said that those who found their matches during the sea god fate matchmaking convention would receive blessings from the captain of the first generation of Shrek set and monsters. In other words, they would be blessed by the sea god himself. The sea god's island and the sea god's lake had all been erected to commemorate his existence. Night fell, and the sky had completely dimmed. Normally at this time, the inner court would be very quiet and peaceful, but on this day, it was becoming quite lively and bustling instead. After dinner, all of the outer court students of a suitable age, particularly those over the age of 18 but below 20, had already entered the inner court well in advance. Only on a day like this would they be granted special entry into the inner court, and all of them were expressions of intense yearning, wishing that they could be taking the place of the inner court disciples participating in the event. The sea god fate matchmaking convention acted as the best form of motivation for them. If they could become one-word battle armor masters, they have a right to participate in this convention. For outer court students who were already over 20 years of age, the door wasn't entirely closed to them either. After all, the age restriction for entry into the inner court wasn't always set in stone. For example, there were some late bloomers who would become one-word battle armor masters at 21 years of age. They would normally have missed their chance to enter the inner court, but they had a second chance. If they could become two-word battle armor masters prior to turning 30, then they'd have a chance to take a supplementary exam, the passage of which will also grant them entry into the inner court. As such, all hope was not lost, even for students above 20 years of age. Many people didn't want to graduate from the outer court even after becoming one-word battle armor masters, and all of these people were striving toward becoming two-word battle armor masters before 30 so they could have another chance to enter the inner court. They simply loved Shrek Academy, and they wanted to do everything they could to stay here. Chapter 737. I'm really looking forward to this. I finally turned 18, so I'll be able to watch the sea god fate matchmaking convention. I've always heard about how extraordinarily powerful our inner court seniors are. I wonder what kind of spectacular show they'll put on for us today. This year's convention is going to be even more exciting than usual because the dragon spear goddess is going to be participating. She may not choose a match for herself, but if she does come, she's definitely going to be the number one beauty at the convention. You speak as if you've seen her before. Of course I have. I once caught sight of her side profile from afar, and I can tell you that she's beautiful to the extreme. Really? Then I have to take a good look at her later. I heard that she's a goddess in the hearts of all of the inner court disciples. On top of that, I've heard that she's just as powerful as she is beautiful. Oh, by the way, have you guys heard? The 2 exchange students from the Douluo Empire have been granted special entry into our inner court, and they're apparently also going to be participating in today's matchmaking convention. I wonder if it's true. It does seem to be true. I've heard of that as well. I hope none of our inner court seniors fall for them. I've heard that among the 2 of them, the male student is extremely powerful. He's only 23 years old, but he's already a 2-word battle armor master. That's insane. That's not all. I've heard a part of his battle armor has already reached the 3-word level. All of the outer court disciples were discussing spiritedly among themselves regarding the upcoming sea god fate matchmaking convention. The hottest topics being discussed were those regarding the dragon spear goddess, Douluo, Yue, and Shrek 7 monsters. This edition of the sea god fate matchmaking convention was clearly more alluring than the previous editions, and their participation was the exact reason behind this. Night had completely fallen at this point, and this meant that the sea god fate matchmaking convention was about to commence. In the distance, there was a small boat slowly drifting over the sea god's lake. The boat was very brightly lit, and all of the outer court disciples bowed toward it in unison. Everyone on the boat was one of the most powerful beings of Shrek Academy, and they were the ones truly controlling Shrek City. Even the Federation had to respect the elders of Shrek Academy's Sea God's Pavilion. Sitting at the very center of the boat was a young man in a set of white robes. He wore a faint smile on his face with a head of black hair trailing down the back of his head, giving off a nonchalant disposition. The one sitting beside him was none other than the Holy Spirit Douluo, who had just been instated as the principal of the inner court not long ago. Next to her was the principal of the outer court, Silver Moon Douluo Elder Kai. The one seated beside Elder Kai were the 2 holy dragons, Scarlet Dragon Douluo Chawoshi and Blazing Dragon Douluo Feng Wuyu. Feng Wuyu's expression was clearly very different from how it normally was. He had always been referred to as a crazy old man, but at this moment, his brows were tightly furrowed, and his head was lowered, seemingly in deep thought about something. Aside from them, there were also several elderly titled Douluos sitting on the boat as well. Everyone on that boat was a titled Douluo, and they were all at least 3-word battle armor masters. Huh? Who's that at the center of the boat? How can he be on the boat when he's so young? Be quiet. If I'm not mistaken, that's the most powerful being in our academy, and perhaps even the most powerful being on the entire continent. Even as far back as 100 years ago, he was already the master of the Sea God's Pavilion. He's a limit Douluo, a 4-word battle armor master, and the spiritual leader of our Shrek Academy. What? You mean he's that man? But he's so young. How is that possible? My god. How can such an old man look so young? I know, right? I've heard that the Holy Spirit Douluo is his wife. Don't call him an old man. How can you call him that when he has such a youthful appearance? By the way, do any of you know his Douluo title? It must be super badass, right? Of course. His Douluo title is Atlas. He is the Atlas Douluo. His martial soul is an Atlas spear, and it's said that he can pierce the heavens with his almighty spear. He's widely renowned to be the most powerful being on the entire continent, and over 100 years ago, he was the captain of that generation of Shrek 7 monsters. He's a true demigod, which makes him the closest being in Shrek Academy to the divine realm. If it weren't for the fact that the aura of the divine realm has been cut off from our world for so long, he would have most likely ascended to that higher realm long ago. All those who had managed to identify the young man sitting on the boat were extremely excited. After all, even for disciples of Shrek Academy like them, opportunities to see this legendary figure were exceedingly rare. All of the students are very excited by your arrival. Brother Ming, Holy Spirit Douluo Yali whispered to the white-robed young man beside her. The man smiled and patted her hand as he replied, I only came here because of Naya. She initially told me that she wasn't planning to participate in this event. After all, she's already 16, so she's technically come of age, but the school's rules state that only those that are above 18 years of age can participate in this convention. However, she suddenly changed her mind and made a last-minute decision to come after all. I suspect that there must be someone she set her eyes on. I want to see who stole the heart of my precious disciple. Yali smiled and said, You're way too doting toward her. You're like a father who'd suddenly discovered that his daughter is going to run off with another boy. The white-robed man chuckled. I'm not even going to deny that. Yali continued in a soft voice. It's all my fault for not being able to birth a child for you. The man patted her hand and consoled. It's all right. Didn't we agree that we weren't going to talk about this anymore? Tears began to well up in Yali's eyes as she gripped tightly onto the man's hand. This man had given her all of the love in the world, and meeting him was the best thing that had ever happened to her. Elder Kai, who was sitting on the other side of Yali, stole occasional glances at the 2 of them while heaving full-on internal sighs. She would do anything to trade positions with Yali, even if she had to give up several decades of her lifespan. However, she was the only person whom he'd chosen among all of the exceptional women who had loved him. Despite being aware of the fact that her body was flawed, he still chose her without any hesitation, rejecting both Elder Kai and Heavenly Phoenix Douluo Len Yaoshu in the process. However, to his credit, he had never hurt them by giving them false hope. He was a very decisive man, and he'd immediately rejected their advances without any hesitation. For a man of his lofty status, it would be more than normal for him to have more than one wife. Elder Kai had once even overheard Len Yaoshu confessing to him that she was willing to become his woman, even if she could only be his concubine. This was Len Yaoshu, the vice chairman of the Spirit Pagoda, a titled Douluo holding an extremely important status in the world of soulmasters. She was a proud woman who maintained a high and mighty demeanor, even in the presence of the president of the Federation, but for him, she had abstained from getting married her entire life, as had Elder Kai. Both of them most likely had the same thought process. After witnessing the very best, they simply couldn't bring themselves to settle for anything else. Indeed, after meeting him, how could any woman have a place for any other man in her heart? He was the perfect, the one who could support the entire world on his shoulders. Atlas Douluo Yunming. In her heart, he could even compare with the legendary spirit Ice Douluo Huo Yuao and the founder of the Tang sect, Thousand Hands Douluo Tang San. In their eyes, Yunming was on par with those two legendary figures. Right at this moment, Elder Kai felt a warm sensation on her hand, and she looked up to discover Holy Spirit Douluo Yali appraising her with a concerned expression. She was indeed envious of Yali, but she also admired her greatly. Yali was the kindest woman in this world. She had lost her reproductive ability, and she had burned through too much of her own life force to administer treatment on a vast number of people in a poverty-stricken area that had been afflicted by a horrible plague. On that occasion, she saved tens of thousands of people who would have otherwise perished to the plague. However, she had also burned through so much of her life force that she was on the brink of death. The Atlas Douluo managed to save her life, but he was unable to completely cure her. Ironically, she was one of the most powerful recovery-type soul masters in the world, but she was unable to heal herself. However, she didn't become bitter nor hateful for this. She simply said that this was a form of divine punishment handed down to her by the heavens. The plague should have harvested tens of thousands of lives, but she prevented it from doing so, and the heavens had already shown great kindness for taking only her reproductive ability in exchange. After she'd been saved from the brink of death, Yunming immediately declared her to be his wife. At the time, they weren't even boyfriend and girlfriend, but he'd still made that announcement without any qualms. Both of them had countless pursuers that they were competing with at the time, but he didn't care. He told her that he'd loved her for a very, very long time, and that when he finally worked up the courage to confess to her, she almost died as a result of the aforementioned incident. Chapter 738. Yali's life force had been replenished by Yunming. He possessed the greatest aptitude out of anyone in this world, and his immense powers granted him a longer lifespan, but he shared half of his life force with her. After that, he had constantly stayed by her side, and he often joked that she was his bride whom he'd stolen from the clutches of death. An extremely lavish wedding had been held for them, one that had shocked the entire Federation. Yali didn't originally belong to Shrek Academy. In fact, she had been groomed by the Federation to be the future successor that was supposed to take over a mysterious organization, but Yunming had taken her without any regard for all of that. As a result, he made the entire mysterious organization his enemy, and the two had clashed in about a dozen or so battles, during which Yunming defeated all of the most powerful beings in that mysterious organization on his own. He had kept Yali by his side with his unfathomable power. In order to protect him, Yali had even told him that she had no feelings for him, but Yunming only told her that time would change everything. In the end, no one was able to take Yali away from him, but Yali's heart had been taken captive by him. This was a piece of history that had shocked the entire continent over 100 years ago, and it was also through that battle that the Atlas Douluo truly forged a resounding reputation for himself. In order to target him, the mysterious organization under the control of the Federation deployed 3 red mechas, all of which were destroyed by him in a span of less than 10 minutes. During that battle, his spear had torn through the heavens, and the enormous spatial fluctuations that had resulted had almost destroyed the entirety of Bright City, which was where the Parliament was situated. At the time, he announced that no one could stop him. If the heavens stood in his way, then he would vanquish the heavens. If the earth were to rise up against him, then he would split the earth. All those who stood against him would be slain, regardless of whether they were man or god. It was none other than this man who had cemented the status of Shrek City on this continent. After careful research that was conducted by the Federation, it was determined that Shrek City was the only place currently in this world that couldn't be threatened by any soul technology. From that day forth, Yunming truly became the Atlas of Shrek Academy, carrying the Academy and Shrek City on his shoulders, and making the Academy an entity that even the Federation had to be wary of. This was the epic love story between the Atlas Douluo and the Holy Spirit Douluo, but their relationship in the next century or so had been very peaceful. It was a tumultuous yet exhilarating beginning that led to a warm and happy marriage. As such, no one could take Yunming away from Yali no matter how much they loved him. Not even the likes of the Silver Moon Douluo and the Heavenly Phoenix Douluo. There had even been many years during which Yali had told him that she wanted him to have more wives. With his top-tier genetics, how could he settle with not being able to pass down his lineage? However, Yunming refused. He told her that his heart was very small, and it only had enough space for her. Loveless relationships purely for reproductive purposes were not what he was looking for. Thus, Yali was unable to convince him, but she always became very sad whenever this conversation topic came up. She was sad that she was unable to birth a child for this man who loved her so much, and whom she loved equally as much. Ahem, please stop abusing dogs, boss. Don't you know that all of us are single? She coughed in a glum manner. In Chinese pop culture, there's a jokingly derogatory term for single people, which literally translates to single dog. Any public displays of affection in front of single people is therefore jokingly referred to as dog abuse, as it's basically couples flaunting their love and happiness in front of single people. Yunming glanced over to find Chuoshi with a wry smile on his face while Feng Wuyu also nodded in a serious manner. He's right. You really shouldn't do that, boss, especially considering you're aware that we were all once Yali's pursuers. Yunming smiled and said, it seems these days have been too peaceful for you. Looks like you need some excitement in your life. How about we find a time? Just pretend as if I'd never said anything. Chuoshi and Feng Wuyu exclaimed in unison. They could clearly tell where Yunming was going with that train of thought. He was definitely going to threaten to practice his spear techniques on the two of them. That would no longer just be a case of figurative abuse. All of the titled Douluos burst into laughter upon seeing this. Elder Kai pursed her lips and said, you two are so in sync with each other. Is that the reason why you're both still single? The boat traveled all the way to the other side of the Sea God's Lake before stopping at a good location that gave everyone on board a good view of the center of the lake. The water in the Sea God's Lake was extremely clear, and when a series of lights appeared like blossoming flowers, the entire lake began to shimmer like a giant sapphire, creating a very dazzling and mesmerizing sight to behold. The lights were spread all around the lake, and upon closer inspection, one would discover that the lights were all situated underwater. These lights filtered through the entire lake, making it appear as if the water itself were glowing. The effect created instilled within the night a sense of romance and vitality. Immediately thereafter, 2 pillars of light erupted in the distance, and a person was standing in each of the golden pillars of light. This was a smiling duo consisting of a man and a woman. The man appeared to be around 30 years of age with a tall and slim figure, and a set of handsome facial features. He was slightly shorter than Wu Zhangkong, but not by much. He wore a Shrek Academy inner court uniform and had a faint smile on his face. The woman beside him was around 170 centimeters tall, and she appeared to be approximately 27 to 28 years old. Her looks were rather ordinary, but she was very charismatic, and her smile gave off a strong sense of benevolence that made her appear very approachable. The Sea God's fate will be found on the Sea God's Lake. Welcome to this year's matchmaking convention, everyone. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Lan Muzi, an inner court disciple, and the woman standing beside me here is Tang Yunmeng, also of the inner court. We will be your hosts for this matchmaking convention tonight. Tang Yunmeng smiled and said, we're both very honored to be the hosts of this event today, and in all honesty, we were only chosen because we're the 2 oldest inner court students at the moment. I really want to become an assistant teacher, but that would be an indirect admission that my age is catching up to me, so we're still here. She was very humorous, and she spoke with a gentle yet uplifting tone, drawing bursts of laughter from all of the outer court disciples standing by the shore. There were not many people who actually knew these two, as all of the outer court disciples in their cohort had already graduated. Their actual ages were actually around 5 years older than they looked. Wu Zhangkong was also standing by the shore, and as he looked at the duo, he couldn't help but heave a faint internal sigh. Senior disciple brother Lan and senior disciple sister Tang both look like they're doing very well. The current cohort of outer court disciples weren't aware of who they were, but he was naturally very familiar with them. Lan Muzi and Tang Yunmeng were both exceptional talents during his generation, and they entered the inner court during the same year as him. After that, he left Shrek Academy for his lover, but the two of them had remained here this entire time. If he recalled correctly, these two were already 3-word battle armor masters, despite the fact that they were still technically students. A situation like this could only be seen in Shrek Academy. It was absolutely unfathomable to think that 3-word battle armor masters could still be disciples of an academy. With their suits of battle armor, their combat prowess had most likely outstripped that of ordinary titled Douluos long ago. If he'd stayed at the academy as well, perhaps he'd also be at their level. After becoming 3-word battle armor masters, one had to focus on cultivating their soul power to progress toward becoming titled Douluos. Senior disciple brother Lan was the brightest talent of our cohort, so he should be an 8th ring Seoul Douluo already. If I'm not mistaken, he should only be 33 years old this year, which would make him the current youngest Seoul Douluo in the entire academy. Senior disciple sister Tang shouldn't be too far behind him, either. Lan Muzi smiled and said, "Indeed, we'll put off graduation as long as we possibly can, not only because we want to pretend to be young, but also because I've forged many unforgettable memories here, including the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention that I participated in." Yinmeng, do you remember the year we participated in the convention? Tang Yinmeng blushed as she rolled her eyes at him. Stop. You're embarrassing me. Lan Muzi chuckled. What's there to be embarrassed about? I'll make sure not to tell everyone about how you rushed over to me during the convention and confessed your love to me in front of everyone. Chapter 739. Oi, you. Tang Yinmeng placed her hands on her hips as an indignant look appeared on her face. Everyone on the shore burst into raucous laughter again. It had to be said that these two were doing a very good job of livening up the atmosphere. The smile on Lan Muzi's face faded, and he looked at Tang Yinmeng with passion in his eyes as he said, "You were the one who confessed to me, but I must tell you now that I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful that you pointed out the right path to me back when I was still just a young man who knew nothing about love. I'm very grateful for how much you've cared for and helped me during these past years, as well as all that you've sacrificed for me. The best decision I'd ever made was to accept your confession without any hesitation. I must have done good deeds during all of my previous 10 lives to accumulate enough fortune to have met you in this life, and I want to be with you for the rest of my life, as well as my next 10 lives." The indignant look on Tang Yinmeng's face vanished, and she blushed as she gently nodded in response. The spectating disciples on the shore erupted into cheers. In contrast, Chawoshi wore an enraged look on his face as he grumbled, "This little rascal is abusing dogs in public. How dare he? Whose disciple is he again?" The old woman sitting on the other side of Yang Ning slowly raised her head before glancing at Chawoshi. "He's my disciple. Is there a problem?" Chawoshi's expression immediately stiffened at the sight of her, and he hurriedly said, "Not at all. I just wanted to say how impressed I am by your exceptional disciple. If you've got nothing useful to say, then shut up. Don't disrupt me while I'm reminiscing about my youth," the old woman said in a cold voice. Yang Ning couldn't help but smile and shake his head. "Sister Yue, you really have to work on that temper of yours." This old woman was completely ordinary in appearance. She wore simple cloth garments, and she looked no different from an elderly woman in a poverty-stricken area. There were not many people who were still alive that were aware of who she was. She was the oldest person in the entire Shrek Academy, and she had been the vice master of the Sea Gods Pavilion back when the previous master of the Sea Gods Pavilion had been alive. She was over 200 years old, and she was even a senior of Yang Ning, thereby making her the person with the highest level of seniority in Shrek Academy. She was normally constantly residing deep within the Sea Gods Pavilion and very rarely left to go anywhere. Chawoshi hadn't even noticed that she was on the boat with them, and his fiery temper was immediately doused at the sight of her. This old woman was the master of the sun and the moon, the dragon empress of light and darkness, and her Douluo title was Light Dark. Around 150 years ago, the mere mention of Light Dark Douluo Long Yeyu was enough to make all soul masters tremble in their boots. She was most renowned for her incredible feat during a conflict with the Spirit Pagoda where she'd swept through the Spirit Pagoda headquarters on her own, then gave the chairman of the Spirit Pagoda at the time a vicious slap to the face. This was supposed to be confidential information, but all of the most powerful beings in the world of soul masters at the time were aware of what had happened. It was due to this incident that a full-blown war had almost erupted between Shrek Academy and the Spirit Pagoda. In the end, the master of the Sea Gods Pavilion had to step intermediate, and Light Dark Douluo Long Yeyu was forced to deliver an apology before this matter was swept under the rug. This incident was a perfect example of her fiery temper and her immense powers. She was the only person in the Sea Gods Pavilion who didn't have to attend any of its meetings, and she was free to do whatever she wanted in Shrek Academy. Yang Ning was only referring to her as sister rather than senior as she had demanded for him to do so in order to make her seem younger. In essence, this was concurrent with the joke that Tang Yinmeng had made at the very beginning. Both Lan Muzi and Tang Yinmeng were her disciples. Long Yeyu's eyes were half closed as she appraised Lan Muzi and Tang Yinmeng with a smile on her face. Looking at these children, I can't help but recall back to my own younger days. It's a pity that old bastard left me so early. Otherwise, we could be watching this together. At the time, our relationship had also blossomed during this matchmaking convention. Her husband was none other than the previous master of the Sea Gods Pavilion, and he passed away 40 years ago. Yang Ning consoled in a low voice, "Sister Yue, we all miss Elder Bay very much as well, but please do look after yourself." Long Yeyu chuckled. "I've already lived for over twice the lifespan of a normal person, and it seems that the older I get, the more reluctant the gods are to take me. Don't worry about me. I can live for at least 20 more years. I have to keep an eye on all of these young kids. Watching them gives me so much joy." Yang Ning nodded with a smile. "Indeed. I'm always in a good mood when I see these children. It's a pity that I wasn't able to profess my love to Yali on the Sea Gods Lake." Long Yeyu chuckled. "It's still not too late." Yang Ning burst into laughter upon hearing this. "I'll have to pass on that. I'm too embarrassed to be doing something so hot-blooded in front of all of these children. This is their stage, so we should just watch their performance." It had to be said that Lan Muzi's passionate speech had ignited the emotions of all of the outer court disciples. In particular, all of the single dogs were filled with jealousy and rage. Tang Yinmeng rested her face against Lan Muzi's chest with a blissful look on her face. She looked up at Lan Muzi with passion in her eyes as she whispered, "Let's host the event first. I'll reward you when we get back home tonight." Both of them were wearing soul speakers, so even though she was whispering, her voice was audible to everyone present. A flurry of wolf whistles and cheers immediately rang out, and it was as if their love had even raised the temperature of the Sea Gods Lake. Lan Muzi cleared his throat. "All right, that's enough dog abuse for now. If you want to find your other half during the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention, then do your best, everyone. Now then, let's welcome all of the participating inner court disciples. I'm sure there are some of you who are still unaware of the rules of this event, so please turn your attention this way." He pointed up ahead as he spoke, and 2 rows of green light appeared not far away from him. This was the light emanating from a series of giant lotus leaves that had been illuminated by the underwater lights. The bright green light was filled with vitality, and it was also particularly eye-catching on the surface of the Sea Gods Lake. The Sea God Fate matchmaking convention is not just a day for finding love, but also an opportunity to display your powers. As such, during the convention, the male and female students must stand on these rows of lotus leaves before me that are separated by about 100 meters. If anyone falls into the water during the event, then I'm sorry, but you'll no longer be able to continue participating in the convention. Prior to the commencement of the first segment, there will be a test of your powers to see who can secure the best positions. Hence, all participating disciples, please take the stage and fight for your positions. Begin. Following a loud cry from Tang Yinmeng, the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention officially commenced. A series of figures suddenly emerged from the 2 sides of the Sea Gods Lake. Some of them sped along the water, while others rose up into the air and took flight. The students on the 2 sides also wore different attire. Those on the left wore large green hooded cloaks that concealed their bodies and heads with green masks that covered their faces. In contrast, the students on the right all wore long white dresses and veiled bamboo hats that obscured their facial features. It was quite apparent that the cloaked students were male, while those in dresses were female. After rushing onto the surface of the Sea Gods Lake, all of them hurtled toward the lotus leaves like shooting stars. If one were to pay close attention, they discovered that all of these students were unleashing different abilities, and all of their movements, speeds, and abilities were unique to themselves. All of the participants were inner court disciples who were somewhat familiar with one another, so if they were to look closely, they'd be able to determine the identities of some of their fellow participants. On the male side, there was a particularly burly student who was moving extremely quickly. As he sped over the surface of the lake, a series of rocks would suddenly emerge from beneath the water, acting as stepping stones for him as he charged toward the center of the first row of lotus leaves. There were a total of 3 rows of lotus leaves for the male disciples compared to only 2 on the female side, so it was quite clear that there was a mismatch in numbers. Right as the burly male student was about to land on the leaf he'd chosen, a figure suddenly flashed past him in a blur before instantly landing on that leaf with unerring accuracy. Light flashed from the leaf beside him, and another person appeared on that leaf as well. The burly male student harumphed coldly as he made a grabbing motion with both hands, and an enormous burst of suction force appeared out of thin air. There were rules surrounding this initial segment stating that no physical contact or soul skills were allowed, but pure soul power could be used to fight for the spots. Chapter 740. A smug look had only just appeared on the face of the male students who'd landed on the front row first when he felt a burst of immense force surging toward him. He was immediately sent flying as a result, and the burly man took his place. Thus, fierce competition commenced for all of the spots, and a spectacular show was put on by all the male disciples. Their potent soul power fluctuations were sending waves erupting over the surface of the lake. But in contrast, the female students were a lot less inclined to compete over spots. In fact, they were even politely offering spots to one another before landing on the lotus leaves in a much more civilized manner. All of the participants were inner court disciples who were extremely powerful, so even though physical contact and soul skills were prohibited, they still put on a marvelous spectacle to behold. After all of the students had landed on a lotus leaf each, everyone was finally able to ascertain the number of participants. Just like in all of the past editions of the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention, there were clearly fewer female students than male students, thereby creating the usual disparity in numbers. There was no helping that. Men simply had superior overall aptitude when it came to cultivating as soul masters, and this applied to Shrek Academy. There were a total of 51 male students, and this was quite a large number considering only single disciples of a suitable age range were eligible for participation. In contrast, there were only 31 female participants. The lotus leaves beneath their feet had all been illuminated by the underwater lights, basking their bodies in a mysterious glow. Around them was the rippling surface of the sea god's lake, while pillars of light stood underfoot. A large number of lights were illuminated in the water around all of the participants following their arrival, and in that instant, the surface of the sea god's lake had become a dazzling stage. During this event, many of them were going to find their true love, and those were perhaps bonds that would last a lifetime. Lan Musi smiled and crossed his arms as he announced, "All right, everyone's all here now. If you can still identify someone despite how you're all dressed, then it has to be true love. However, I feel like that's probably rather implausible. At the very least, I was unable to identify anyone back when I took part in this event. Indeed, it was very difficult to identify anyone when their entire bodies and faces had been concealed. They could only make observations before everyone had stepped onto the lotus leaves, but at the time, everyone was too busy competing for spots, so they simply didn't have time to observe the other side. The female students were all wearing the same dresses, and most of them were very slender, so the only difference that could be spotted between them was their heights. On top of that, they were also wearing large veiled bamboo hats, which made it even more impossible to identify anyone." Lan Musi smiled and continued, "According to the tradition of this convention, the first segment is known as Perfect Match. The name is very alluring, but don't be fooled. It's a very difficult segment. There are 31 female disciples standing in a row around 100 feet away from all of you. As can be seen, all of them are wearing veiled bamboo hats that prevent you from being able to glean their true appearances. To put it simply, this is a segment where all of you male disciples will have to work together. The 51 of you can go one at a time, using your own methods to attack the female disciples. You can attack one disciple or multiple disciples, and your objective is to sweep their bamboo hats off their heads. After all, how are you supposed to find a girlfriend if you can't even see what they look like, right? This first segment will also be a chance for all of you to display your powers. Whoever manages to sweep off the most hats would naturally be the most powerful one among you. During this segment, the female disciple can't help one another, nor can they attack the male disciples in retaliation. They can only adopt passive defense to try and keep their hats on their heads. If a female disciple were to be knocked into the water during this process, then they'll be eliminated. However, generally speaking, the male disciples are quite measured in their attacks during the first segment. After all, if all of the girls are knocked into the water, how are you going to find your true love? The outer court disciples on the shore were all looking on with bated breath. The matchmaking convention was finally about to commence. In this segment, requited love alone was not enough. One also had to possess sufficient power. Those who found their true love during the event were indirectly displaying to everyone that they were powerful enough to deserve love. The first segment, Perfect Match, was not that simple as the girls could defend themselves. Of course, some of the girls were more willing to reveal their identities, so they'd naturally be more cooperative during this process. However, those who were more reluctant or had no intention of finding love during this event would do their best to protect their hats. As such, this was not just a contest of powers, but also a battle of wits and psychology. The Perfect Match segment for every edition of the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention was always different, so it was a very interesting spectacle to behold. As soon as Lan Musi's voice fell, the lotus leaves beneath the feet of the female disciples began to move on their own, arranging them into a single row. He then turned to the front row of male disciples with a smile and said, "All right, now it's time for you to display your masculine charm. I'll be calling out your numbers, and prior to commencing your attacks, you can choose whether you'd like to take off your mask or not." In contrast, the girls are prohibited from taking off their own hats during this segment, so if you don't knock off their hats, then it'll be very difficult to identify them. The rules of the matchmaking convention weren't very complex, and most of the students had already done some research beforehand, so they were largely unsurprised by these rules. Lan Musi continued, "Boy number 1, you can choose whether you want to remove your mask." Boy number 1 wasn't the first male disciple standing in the front row, but instead, he was standing in the second row, and his number had already been assigned to him beforehand. He had clearly already educated himself on the relevant rules, and he immediately replied, "I choose to take off my mask." He raised a hand and removed his mask as he spoke. In the past editions of the event, most of the male disciples during this segment chose to remove their masks. The reason for that was very simple. They had to let the female disciples see them so they could be chosen. Unless they hadn't planned on finding a match for themselves in the first place, most of the male disciples would choose to reveal themselves during this segment. Boy number 1 was a tall and broad young man. His appearance was rather plain, but he stood ramrod straight, and his eyes were shimmering with light. Lan Musi made a hand gesture toward him. "You may begin." The man smiled and said to the row of female disciples, "Please pardon my insolence." He tapped his foot gently onto the lotus leaf beneath his feet as he spoke, and he rose up into the air. He encircled his arms in front of him before abruptly thrusting them outward, and 5 rings of light emerged around his body in quick succession, consisting of 2 yellows and 3 purples, thereby revealing him to be a soul king. In reality, 5-ring soul kings were very commonplace among inner court disciples, and from the combination of his soul rings, it could be seen that he wasn't a particularly outstanding disciple of the inner court, so it made sense that he had to settle for a spot in the second row. A layer of azure wind propelled his body forward, and it quickly transformed into a vast expanse of azure light that swept toward the other side of the sea god's lake. Azure light flashed, and massive waves were instantly swept up over the surface of the lake before hurtling toward the female disciples. If they protected their hats, then they'd be struck by the waves, leaving them soaking wet in an instant. This boy number 1 was implementing quite a daring scheme. Among the female disciples, one of the women standing at the center harumphed coldly before her body rose up into the air. She hadn't leapt or jumped. Her body simply levitated upward. She then swept her right hand through the air, and a total of 7 soul rings instantly emerged beneath her feet, consisting of 2 yellows, 3 purples, and 2 blacks. The massive waves hadn't even reached her before they suddenly paused in midair. An intriguing turn of events then unfolded. The third soul ring beneath her body lit up, and she pointed forward with her right index finger. All of a sudden, the massive wave that had congealed in midair suddenly took on the form of a ferocious tiger before turning around and pouncing directly toward boy number 1. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.